All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. On today's episode, we have a very special guest, Matthew Herrera. Matthew, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Rich. Thanks for having me on here.
Absolutely. For those of us that don't know anything about you, can you please tell the audience a little bit about you and how you help people?
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned, my name is Matt Herrera. I'm an associate marriage and family therapist based in Pasadena, California, with the Feeling Space. And I specialize in working with anxiety, OCD, trauma, as well as working with a lot of creatives and a lot of artists in the entertainment industry. So think musicians, your writers, your screenwriters, and people that are just really managing production for some of the big studios here in Los Angeles. And what really drew me to the field was not only a fascination with the inner world of how our own thoughts, emotions, and past experiences shape our relationships, our work, our families, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. I've noticed that many creative people struggle with perfectionism, obsessive thinking, burnout, and their creativity is a big strength for them, right? But at the same time, that mind that generates those brilliant ideas, it can also generate a lot of pressure for them. So my work focuses on helping people understand those patterns and regulate their nervous system through approaches like exposure and response prevention, or ERP, for OCD, brain spotting to help process some trauma, as well as somatic therapy techniques as well. So at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer that therapy is not about changing who someone is, but it is about helping their mind and body work with them instead of against them.
Wow, Matthew, that was amazing. So many threads to talk about and pull on there. I'd like to start with your demographic, which is the artists, the creatives, people that kind of are in that industry. What do most
Mhm.
people misunderstand about the mental health struggles, with this population?
Absolutely. One of the biggest ones is this misconception of suffering is needed to be this great creative artist or this great artistic mind. There's this long standing romanticized myth that great art comes from instability or emotional chaos. Like think of the tortured artist, right? That's the one that immediately comes to mind. Clinically, that's what I rarely see though. Most artists now are not struggling because they're creative. They're struggling because they exist in an environment where their own identity, their livelihood, their sense of self-worth, I mean, they're under constant evaluation. So, and these industries, especially if you're looking like big music industry, like someone who's like in Warner Music or Nuclear Blast, or something where there is a producer and then there's like a board of directors on top of that, they're constantly being scrutinized. Like, are you selling? Are you meeting your deliverables? So you do see in these creative, and this also applies to screenwriters. This applies to actors. This applies to comedians. Anybody who's in this type of world. So these creative industries combine financial instability, public scrutiny, and really it takes a deep personal investment in the work that they're creating to even put out their own art. So that really creates a nervous system that really gets to rest. And I do think of Bessel van der Kolk, The Body Keeps a Score, that infamous, that very polarizing book we've all read. I think of this because we see that the body adapts to prolonged stress, is how he talks about it, especially with veterans. You see artists live in a constant state of anticipatory threat as well. They're waiting for rejection. They're waiting for criticism. They're waiting to find out if they still have their jobs if they're being laid off. So, in the culture that romanticizes the tortured artist, they really mean they have a nervous system that's under constant chronic pressure. So, and I would say with the artists, the number one problem I see is the problem isn't that artists feel deeply. The problem is that their nervous systems rarely get a chance to recover.
Mm. Wow, Matthew. Yeah, man. Thank you for putting that into perspective because that's something that I didn't consider, because you're so right. Like I did have this kind of stereotypical view of the artist that struggles and there's a lot of pain, and through that pain they could, you know, um, what is that? Transmute that, manifest that into their art, and it makes for beautiful art. But
Yeah,
dude, I never considered the real systemic pressures from the industry, like all the things you talked about, as far as like contracts being expired, people getting laid off, fired, whatever, constant evaluation, the sales. Didn't even think about that. Like that is,
financial exploitation with
oh
royalties. Even
yeah.
they're not getting paid anything. You even see
Mhm.
this with authors; like they're only as good as what their last book sold. So it's just it's landmines really for them.
Wow, dang. How did you get into working with the creatives?
Excellent question. So, I mean, frankly, it just happened organically. I do live and practice in Southern California in Los Angeles, and where I live and where my office is based in Pasadena, we're only about 10 miles away from Burbank, where all the big movie studios are at. Hollywood is just down for anyone who's not local here, it's just down the freeway, right? So I could be in Hollywood right now in 30 minutes. So, and the way that Los Angeles is based is that everybody doesn't just live in one area. It is spread throughout the entire metropolis. Like it's like a puzzle. So, living in Southern California meant that many of the communities around me are connected to film, to music, to writing, performance. And you can't even walk to a coffee shop without seeing some artists there or seeing flyers for what people are trying to do. I mean, this is why we have so many transplants here. Like that TV show, I Love LA. People in LA, they hate watch it. It's too accurate. But over time, as I started, I used to work with, in my old job, I used to take Medi-Cal, and we were on one of the Blue Cross plans we worked with motion picture insurance. So over time, that definitely helped get the foot in the door for working with these artists. But I did find the more that I work with them, it became clear that many of the struggles or patterns I had been studying clinically, such as anxiety disorders, obsessive thinking, perfectionism, right? Trauma responses, and really identity development. So as all these kind of worked together, I found that, creativity and mental health intersect is really interesting because, creative people tend to have a highly active internal world. So that imagination is a strength for them. This is how they come up with some great storytelling or great music. But psychologically, it can also amplify a lot of rumination. It can bring in a lot of self-doubt and some obsessive loops. So once I began working more with the creatives, I realized that therapy had to understand the creative process itself, not just the symptoms. And I mean, for me, that just opened the Pandora's box, and I just wanted to learn more and more about it. And frankly, I found that I was able to really make some really great rapport with people in this field as well.
Yeah. Wow. That is so interesting because, I never considered that internal world being a force for good or a force for lack of a better term, like bad, or at least a force that doesn't serve the client. It's like, yeah. And as you were shedding some light about how that rich internal world, that creativity can amplify a lot of these things that don't serve the client. That is so interesting.
Yeah.
How can you kind of tell in your work, Matthew, the difference between like passion and pathology?
That's a great question, and that distinction is so incredibly important, right? Because we see that passion, it expands somebody's life. Like, I'm passionate about coffee. Maybe bad example here, but like, I love Cafe Bustelo. I know about, Pete's. I have some really great places that I love going to locally around here. But what would become obsessive with it is, say, that passion I have for coffee starts to expand my life. But when it becomes difficult, that's when it starts to generate curiosity, experimentation, and forward movement. Pathology, on the other hand, where it becomes a problem, is when it starts to shrink my life. So now I start to have anxiety or obsessive compulsive patterns. They start to take over. And the person often becomes stuck in loops. Like, for example, with artists, it's endless revisions, constant re-recordings, constant self-doubt, constantly needing to seek out assurances from other people in the industry and still thinking, is it good enough? Can I submit it? I don't know. You see this in academics as well. So you see an overall avoidance of releasing the work. So one question I'll often ask clients is, does this process give you energy or does it trap you? And sometimes they get stuck and there's just silence, and we sit in the silence because, and some people don't want to admit it, but this is part of the process, right? Is that if they're being trapped, they're no longer looking at passion. Now they're looking at anxiety, trying to regulate their own uncertainty about their work. So I would say that's the difference. Passion, it enhances their life. But pathology, where there's something there, we start to see it's making them feel stuck or even feel trapped.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty awesome that you have you approach it with a lot of nuance, and you're really careful to make that distinction with your clients. What is it like, Matthew, when you're working with clients and then they have that moment where they realize, like, hey, this is no longer energizing now? There's like, they're feeling trapped. What is that like?
It's a very emotional process for them. I mean, some people find it, how do I put it? They find it freeing because now there's closure. Like, oh my God, they're like, I'm not happy living this way anymore. I'm not happy, being stuck in these loops. But on the other hand, it causes a crisis of confidence. It causes a crisis of identity because you have people that have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars going to, say, art school or like the Berkeley College of Music, or down the street from me, the Art Center in Pasadena. And these are expensive places, right? They usually don't give a lot of scholarships to anyone, and they're very niche because people are thinking, I spent 5-6 years getting this degree and then a master's, or going on tour, it hasn't worked out, and find out how really unhappy I am. What do I do now? So you see that people start to consider that career pivot and start to think, do I go teach people how to play trumpet? Do I go teach art classes? Do I try to get into academia where there's not a lot of greener pastures there either? So it can be very distressing for them. And usually we need to make the space to just process that and help them understand, what does a pivot look like if it's needed, or how can they find their love for what they were doing again? That way they don't have, can they look their fears directly in the face, right? And start to learn to become less obsessive, but more passionate again.
Yeah. Matthew, have you seen a client or work with a client where there's like some kind of self-sabotage going on?
Yes, all the time. There's a couple clients I've worked with in the past that they get in their own way. They'll have great ideas, they'll have great outlines for a story they're trying to tell, or they'll have a great piece of music that they've worked on. And sometimes what's pretty cool is that they'll play it for me, or they'll send me the recording, and we'll listen to it together and we'll talk. I'm like, oh, yeah, like you were talking about these lyrics about this individual. What were you trying to say there? It's like, okay, like there's a lot of emotion in like the tone of your guitar here, or in the solo. Like, what are you trying to, unpack here? And, it's usually pretty powerful. And I'm like, okay, so it sounds like the song is done then. And they're like, well, no, I have to revise it, or I need to re-record it, or, I think I could get the solo better. And it's like, they're just constantly replaying performances repeatedly. And they're seeking that reassurance, which is something I had to be mindful of too. Like, are you looking for my own reassurance after your work is good enough? What is it about my opinion that makes that value? I'm not a producer, I'm not an artist. I could play bass, but I'm not a professional musician. My fingers are too fat. So I would always, we look at if they're looking to delay release indefinitely, because that in itself could be their own form of self-soothing, but it's really a crutch for them. But, it's like they have a broken leg and they don't see that they have a cast on. They forget. So, it could be, they could be shooting themselves in the foot, essentially.
Wow. Yeah, that's so interesting. You talked about OCD earlier in the episode, Matthew, and I like to talk about control. What is it about this dynamic of control, whether it's accepting it or not accepting it, especially in this kind of industry where, success could feel random sometimes,
Yeah, control is extremely limited. And I think is the hard part that people struggle with. Because we know what anxiety is. It's about you're trying to control something you can't control at all. Like, you can't control if you're going to, have an unpleasant interaction going to the grocery store. We can't control if a car is going to hit us, when we're trying to park, or if we go to get coffee across the street and, we can't do it because the line's too long. Right. And so I think that for creatives in particular, control is very limited. They can control their craft, they can control their discipline, they can control their process even, but they can't control how their work will be received. So for people with those anxious or obsessive minds, that uncertainty feels just incredibly intolerable. But, one thing we'll try to work on is really learning to tolerate the uncertainty. That's central to like evidence-based OCD treatment, especially when it comes to exposure and response prevention, ERP.
Yeah,
I mean, this is relevant for all artists, regardless of their field or genre.
Yeah, that's interesting. Matthew, let's talk about, like, for somebody who's kind of in that roller coaster with the profession, like, you don't know if your contract's going to be up, like you're going to get fired, what's in store for the next gig, like what's going on. Like, I imagine that causes a lot of stress. And what I know about people in general and with our clinical work is that one of the big coping strategies is to do drugs and alcohol. And so I wonder if in your demographic, do you see, substance use? And if so, what happens after they get sober if that's something that they pursue?
Yeah, so we see substance use definitely. In fact, sobriety often fits into their own identity. So for artists, when they are using substances or they're using sex or anything to help cope with what's going on, they're in an emotional state where they are looking for some type of escape. They are looking to just cope with what they have going on. And for people who do get sober and it suddenly feels like the creativity disappears, what disappears isn't their creativity, but what does disappear is that familiar emotional states they were used to being in all the time. So, because we do see that whatever activity or substance that they're doing, this functions as a nervous system regulator for themselves. So you do see they reduce inhibition, they'll quiet those internal critics, or they relieve their anxiety with the quick fix. So when they're sober, their brain's relearning how to access creativity without those shortcuts. And just like sobriety, they're learning how to feel again without being in an altered state. So that transition can feel very frightening, but the creativity process itself rarely disappears. It's just in a different, they're remembering it differently or experiencing it differently, which can be unsettling for them at first.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So as they do their work with you potentially, and they're kind of overcoming some of the substance use or other ways of coping, like you mentioned, sex or other things,
Mhm.
there will be no impact on their creativity. Like we're just getting over the concern of the substance or whatever they're using to cope. Is that
Mhm.
okay? Gotcha.
Yeah, we're getting over it. We're getting over that, and it's like, okay, you're learning how to write this guitar with without drinking again.
Mhm.
Okay, what's happening? Like, I'm feeling stressed out. It's like, okay, you want to drink because you're feeling nervous, right? What's really underneath that anxiety? What if it sucks? So I'm hearing that you're not confident in what you're writing, right? You just
Mm.
really keep digging deeper and deeper. That's how we work
Yeah.
with this.
Wow. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that there's a lot of layers to these issues. And even just right now when you did it, like the couple of layers that you went into there about that client who's like, "Oh, yeah, what if it sucks?" And then you're like, "Oh, what I'm hearing is that there's a lack of confidence," and that's
Yeah.
so good. Wow, I wish I could be a fly on the wall and just like listen to your sessions, Matthew. That sounds really interesting.
And
Um,
this is where the ERP comes in, right? Because then you're
mm,
like, okay, it's like, let's make a list. Your biggest fear right now is people will not like your song. What does that mean? Like, what's the fear? He's like, people aren't going to like it. I'm not going to get paid. People are going to say I'm a scam. And then you list out every single thing that's there. And then it's like, okay, so let's put that on a scale like 1 to 10. How loud is this fear? And then it's really getting everything in and out there of all the stuff that they're experiencing that really helps them understand, okay, so that's what's really going on. They're like, I'm drinking to maybe run away from all these or to silence all these inner critics I have, when really the biggest critic that they have is themselves.
Ooh, wow. What is it like for the clients to spell it out? Like you mentioned, write it down. Are you guys actually writing it down? All these
Yeah, I
things?
encourage them. Yeah, I encourage them to write it down. If I'm in person with them, I'll give them a sheet of paper and they do it. And sometimes they'll even do it with me. If not, I'll usually give them a homework assignment to, hey, spend some time to do this. Or if they don't feel comfortable writing it down and they don't want to do it at home, it's like, all right, we're going to do it right now. You
Yeah.
tell me what's going on. And I write it down for them, give it to them, say, that's right there. And
Wow.
so yeah, sometimes you
Yeah.
need to have those boundaries with them.
Yeah. Matthew, what is it like when they put it all out on paper? Like, what's the reaction? Is it like surprise? Is it anger? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a mix. I mean, sometimes they're surprised, but they're just like, I didn't know I had all this going on. Sometimes there's an emotional response to it. Sometimes there is anger, like, I don't feel any of this. And it's like, okay, what's happening right now?
Hmm.
Like you're becoming angry. What does that mean? And they're like, I don't know. And it's like, well, clearly we're touching on something important. Hence why we're having the emotional response that we're having right now.
Hmm.
So it's very illuminating for sure. And it can happen in a variety of ways as well.
Wow. Yeah. Earlier you talked about identity, and I wonder, you know, um, Matthew, I'm going to start over. I'm going to get rid of that part because I think you covered it in our previous answer. Um,
Okay.
Matthew, so yeah, that's really interesting. So for creatives who are on that journey to recovery or just progressing with their issues in therapy, what's kind of more destabilizing for them? Is it losing the substance or losing the story that they've been kind of telling themselves about who they are?
Usually the story. Identity narratives are very powerful psychological structures. So when we see that narrative starts to dissolve, people can feel temporarily disoriented, but therapy can help them, really discover that creativity existed before the narrative and it continues without that narrative as well. Because, you're literally shaking somebody's worldview. You're taking it and you're flipping it on its head. And that in itself can cause immediate, self-crises and really make them wonder, like, am I an imposter? So now the imposter syndrome starts to pop up as well. So yeah, it could be very, the narrative, very powerful.
Yeah, man. Yeah, absolutely. And but I interviewed a mythologist, and he was talking about, to your point, that he believes that the primary operating system of the brain is narratives, and so I could see where in your work the narrative is probably the most destabilizing thing for them. That's really interesting. Matthew, yeah, I'm wondering, how does a client of yours who's kind of navigating a lot of these pressures, layoffs, strikes, mergers,
Yeah.
issues with contracts, how do you help them kind of get a break, because they see you for an hour or two, and then they go back, and then how do you help them kind of sustain some of that progress outside of the 1 hour session that they do with you?
Yeah, especially over the past few years in particular. Just looking at different studios buying each other, deals that are going through, but now they're not going through anymore. So now everybody's wondering, do we still have jobs? Are we still getting laid off? What does this even look like? And you have seen a huge amount of turnover in the field because people are just tired. And a lot of that comes, the way I help clients is, first, we just have to acknowledge the reality. This isn't simply personal anxiety, right? The clients are experiencing systemic instability. There's chronic unpredictability that's there. And this creates the same psychological responses that we see in trauma, because now they're acting hypervigilant. They are emotionally exhausted. They're burned out. They have no idea when this cycle is going to end. So in my job, the therapeutic work focuses on helping them regulate their nervous systems as best as I can, and trying to reestablish those boundaries around what they can control, which becomes very difficult because, in the field of arts and entertainment, you're almost celebrated and encouraged for having no work-life balance, for, immersing yourself fully in the culture of the company or in the art that you're trying to produce. So it is definitely difficult. Their nervous systems just never get a break. And this is why we see people having, they're using their EAP plans more often than they ever have before. You're seeing people saying, that's it, I have a day off, I'm going to go hiking. Well, they disappear because no one knows what's going to happen. And at the same time, we just have to acknowledge that all the mindfulness, all the mindful breathing, somatic therapy, anxiety, we can do all we can. But at the end of the day, if there especially is financial instability and financial precarity, where do we help with that? Where do we go?
Yeah, it's got to be a tough spot to be in, for sure, especially as a clinician, where like you're doing your best, you're doing all the evidence-based techniques and interventions that we learn about, especially you with your advanced training, and then they could be regulated and doing well, and then they go right back into the mixer, and it's just like,
Exactly.
oh man, yeah, that's got to be tough to navigate. Matthew, I'd like to switch gears a little bit and ask about AI. Is that okay?
Yeah, of course. It's hot, huge debates in the field on it, for sure.
Yeah, man, absolutely. And that's something I want to talk about, because I know that AI is making things a lot easier for the industry, as far as like video generation, graphics, all these things, and so I'm just kind of curious, man, like what's been the response by the artists in the face of like AI being introduced, if it has been in that industry?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, right? Because on one hand, I remember about a year ago, a lot of screenwriters and writers in particular it was grief, because their creativity and their art is really tied to their identity and meaning. And when technology pops up that looks like it can replicate that creative output, these individuals are feeling as if something that was uniquely human that human experience and the human condition of their writing was being threatened. And I know there was that one actor, I forget, I think she was an AI generated actor that people were wanting to use, and this was very controversial. But if there's one thing I've seen, especially what we've seen with AI music now, there's a hunger for non-AI generated art. People still want that human writing. They still want music that's produced by a human being. And we are seeing that people are being more critical of AI in all industries, which is giving those creatives some hope that, yeah, we still have it. Like, and I know, like in our field, right, in mental health, we see it all the time. It's like, oh no, AI is going to replace therapists. No, it's not. Like, it'll maybe help us with giving intervention ideas. Maybe it'll help us with how do we market, right? But at the end of the day, people want that human connection. So at first, artists were seeing a lot of grief. They did see the existential threat, but now there's more hope about it than anything.
Yeah. Do you find that your clients or just artists in general are kind of embracing AI and actually using it as leverage in a way?
It depends. Like, there are people who need to submit reports or get data done. They will use it to help them out, to help maybe see an angle or present it in a certain way that they haven't thought about. But when it comes to writing their stories or creating music, they usually really shy away from it. I know one artist has used AI as a way to maybe, like, when he's mastering or producing his own mixes, he'll be like, okay, because there is some AI tools out there that are supposed to help with that. He's like, let's see what this thing says. And then he'll find out, like, no, I wouldn't have done that at all. Or he's like, that's not a bad idea, but I'm going to do it on my own and make it mine. So you see that maybe they'll pitch ideas from it, but there's usually a very skeptic. Like, people use it mainly more for like frivolous things, or like, I'm going to Google this. Maybe I'll just ask ChatGPT, for example.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's interesting, Matthew. I like to switch gears a little bit because earlier you talked about brain spotting.
Yes.
For somebody that has never or does know a whole lot about mental health and or maybe they don't know anything about brain spotting, can you explain it simply? Like, how does that work with the clients that you work with?
So brain spotting is it's almost like a very gentle version of EMDR. And what it does is brain spotting works directly with the body-brain connection rather than relying solely on cognitive processing. For example, I know David Grand, he's the founder of brain spotting. He describes it as assessing the brain's deep processing centers through eye position and focused attention. And it is useful for artists and creatives, and I would say especially veterans, right? Because you see that they're already highly verbal, highly analytical, whereas traditional talk therapy can stay in an intellectual layer. What brain spotting does is it allows people to, connect into a deeper emotional material, or an emotional layer even, to really process through their nervous system. Because as they are looking at this point, like if I bring out a pen and I tell you, if you look at this and think about the traumatic memory you went through, and you're staring at the pen and you're like, okay, I'm a kid, the car's coming near me. Like, if you got hit by a car, right? And it's like, I'm scared, I'm nervous. Like, you're able to replay it. But as you're doing so, it's done in a safe environment, and you're finding out, like, you know what? I'm getting some closure from it as well. It's very, I can't do a live demonstration that'll take like 30, 40 minutes, but that's essentially what it is in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's interesting. What is it about talk therapies or the other kind of cognitive therapies that rely on talking that kind of fall short of the brain body connection?
Well, trauma is stored in the body, and we've seen that anxiety gets stored in the body, fear gets stored in the body. I mean, this is why, especially in populations that have had a lot of exposure to traumatic experiences, such as veterans or first responders as well. We see that they come in with back pain, leg pain, stomach pain, or when they get upset or they're nervous, they can understand, they can see, like, oh, my stomach's upset, right? So, and then, quoting, the body keeps a score, we see that it explains how traumatic experience are encoded physiologically, not just cognitively. So someone may understand their trauma intellectually, but they still feel those intense physiological reactions. And somatic therapy, even if it's just like mindful breathing, groundedness, or even just trying to just take deep breaths and reset yourself, that can help the body complete unresolved survival responses as well, because everything's just constantly jumping in people's shoulders when they are jumping.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I have read some articles. I'm not brain spotting or EMDR trained, but I have read some articles about that really do support everything you're talking about. Like people will feel a certain emotion as a result of something traumatic, and then out of nowhere they'll start like having like chronic stomach pain, or like
Hmm.
some kind of chest pain, or even like things that are not really traditional. That's not even the right word, but like they'll have like random knee pain, and
Yes.
so that and they'll just be like, oh, my knees, but I don't know what I did, I didn't hit it, nothing like that. And then as they do the work, it turns out that for some reason the body chose the knee to manifest the pain, and as they work through their issues, and that pain just kind of gradually subsides. Have you seen some of that in your own work?
Absolutely. I get a lot of chest pain, a lot of stomach pain, a lot of headaches is common.
Yeah.
A lot of people talk about like, oh, my shoulders are hurting. It's like, well, what is it about the shoulders? So then when they start to do like a grounding, like I'll often do a grounding exercise. It's like, all right, close your eyes, feel settled on the couch. Let's do a quick body scan, check in with the feet, the shoulders, the hips, check in with your thumbs, check in with your neck, like all the obvious points that hold tension, even the scalp is a place that can hold tension. And sometimes clients will, after we do the body scan for about 5 minutes, I'll be like, okay, so what did you notice? They're like, you know what? They're like, my chest or my shoulders are really tight. My chest is tight. Or I have some stomach pain. It's like, well, what's been going on? Ask yourself, like, what have you been holding on to lately? And they're like, you know what? I got in a fight with my partner last week and I've been really thinking about it. And they're like, yeah, it's like, I just get so amped up. And as they're thinking about the fight, and then we see that they're starting to hold themselves. Like I had one client, she was talking about an experience where her brother and mother got into a pretty big fight or not a big fight, but there was tension because she saw that her brother's trying to open up to the mom and be like, hey, check out this song I wrote. Because they're all musicians, so that makes a very, unique dynamic in the household. And the mother was very like, oh, that's an okay song. Yeah, it's okay. But was very just kind of not interested, a little dismissive of it. And as the client is recounting it, and when she was just like, and I just see it just makes me want to get mad like that. And she just like was ready to explode. And I was like, you look like you're about to explode out of your chest right now. And she didn't notice that when she was upset that she grips herself very tightly. So, I mean, yeah, doing a quick body scan and really understanding how stress can manifest on the body or feelings can manifest on the body can be very eye-opening, and also helps them understand that what their symptoms are, what's causing the symptoms, or what they even manifest as.
Yeah, interesting. What do you think changes first as somebody kind of progresses through therapy and they're talking their way through it while they're experiencing those pains? Like, do you think it's their symptoms that change first, or is it maybe like a sense of safety? What are your thoughts on that?
I would say a sense of safety, or at least understanding what they need to feel safer. And as their nervous system starts to take steps, or as they start to take steps with their nervous system, right? You can see that the symptoms like anxiety, the obsessive thinking, the hypervigilance, or even the back pain or shoulder tightness, that starts to decrease naturally. So it's all holistically related together, which is pretty awesome to see when things start to work out that way.
Got it. Yeah, that's so good. Matthew, I like to shift gears and ask you about your gender. And I think
Okay,
that's,
yeah,
if you're okay with that. And the reason why is because
let's
eighty
do it.
percent of 80%. I've read a stat that 80% of the therapists are female, and so I just wonder, um,
Mhm.
there's an assumption really in the field that men typically work with other men. Where do you think that belief comes from?
I laugh at that because I remember when I was starting my grad school journey, right, as an MFT school, my advisor at the time said, "So, Matt, what do you think? What do you want to? Have you thought about who you want to work with? Do you want to specialize in working with men?" I was like, "Oh, okay. I guess this is my fate, right?" I think the assumption, about male therapists only working with men, I think this really comes from the broader cultural narrative about gender and emotional expression. Like you mentioned, like 80% of women are therapists, or 80% of therapists are women. Historically, therapy has been viewed as a space where emotional vulnerability, relational attunement are central. And stereotypically, those have been associated with women, not men. And because women make up the majority of the field, it really reinforces that perception that therapy is a primarily female profession. So, I think when people encounter a male therapist, sometimes we're met with that assumption, right? That, oh, you must only focus on men. But, clinically, that's not what we tend to see. I mean, most therapists work across genders, and, therapeutic attunement isn't determined by gender. It's determined by the training. It's determined by the presence. It's determined by their therapeutic relationship. And dare I say, some of the best work I've done have not been with men. It's been with women. It's been with teenage girls even, or people that found working with the male, like working with me, to be a very healing experience. Because I am mindful of the space I take up. I'm, even though we're on camera, I'm 6'1", I'm broad shouldered, I have a beard. I'm not a small guy. I take up space, and people can become intimidated by that. So but they find it healing too, right? Because some people come into therapy because of what they've experienced, and sometimes men are not very nice, especially to women. So that in itself can be a triggering dynamic as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting because as you were talking about that, Matthew, I was imagining the client who may have had some kind of traumatic experience or a history where involving a male, and being able to be in the presence of a male that can be attuned, that can be validating, that can just provide a lot of support. Really, I think that in itself could be healing, and so I
Yeah.
think that's a really, really powerful dynamic. What has been the feedback from the clients who work with you, and gender kind of is a part of the healing journey that they're on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's been interesting, and I say this because I've had clients verbatimly tell me, I wasn't sure what it was going to be like to work with a male therapist, especially with the artist. That came up after session number 1 I had with a client of mine, and I always check in at the end of the first session, like, hey, so I know I'm a male, and you reported a lot of trauma. Are you comfortable working with me? And we had the consult, and they agreed to the consult, and then she came in, we did everything. And after the first session, I said, do you still feel comfortable working with me? And she said, yeah, I do. She's like, I had some concern about it. And first I thought it was going to be really interesting, but I really appreciate your directness. Maybe you could have gathered through, this episode. I'm a pretty direct person. I say things that need to be said. And that if there is an issue, I'll say, hold on. Like, you just said that's a problem. We got to talk more about that. And she really likes that perspective. And that's what I have found from non-male clients, is that they do appreciate my perspective. They do appreciate having a different worldview of things too. So, it kind of does challenge them a bit, but there's growth, because if we're not challenging our clients, they're not going to grow.
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. Matthew, I'd like to ask about the client's journey with you. Let's say a client wants to reach out. How do you know that you're a good fit for them and that they are a good fit for you?
So it's always a consult. I'll ask them, what are they looking to work on? And sometimes it'll be they want to work on taking back control with dating, which, okay, sure, we could talk about that. I could help you talk about dating anxiety. I could help talk to you about self-worth, confidence, you name it. But I'll usually even start almost therapy with them in a way, in that opening consultation call, just saying, well, typically it comes from this. Have you explored these dynamics? And if they're ready to do the work, and I can tell that, I feel like connection with them, I could be open with them, and they are also willing to be open with me, then I know we can do some really great work with each other. When I do have someone reach out to me and it's not a good fit, and sometimes you can just tell, through that email, I'll refer them out to somebody that, could be a better fit for them, because it would be very unethical of me just to take somebody because they can pay me. But because if I'm not going to do good work with them, and it's like, I don't know. I will say at the beginning of my journey, when I started, like when I was a young associate with only 200 hours, I was very open to trying to work with everybody, regardless of what the issue was, because, I want to find out what my niche is. And initially, I thought I was only going to work with veterans and first responders. I didn't think I was going to be working with artists or creatives. It found me rather than me finding it. Because I did my internship with U.S. vets, and that was humongously eye-opening, working with with the military populations, and I came from a military family, so I have a soft spot for vets, still do to this day. But there's a whole other group of challenges that come with different populations as well. So yeah, I was very open to trying with everybody, but I found out really quickly, like if there's like eating disorders, for example, I'm maybe not the best fit for that, but I have a great colleague who is. Or if somebody wants to do like prenatal health, I'm not your guy. Or postpartum, that's not me. But I'll find you. I know people that do take that. So I'll usually find out what the presenting problem is and see if I work with it or if I feel comfortable working with it, and then we hit the ground running from there after the consultation call.
Nice. And so when a client does a consultation call and they show up to the first session, what does the first session look like?
First session is I really just want to make them feel safe. Of course, we got to do the informed consent, revisit the limits of confidentiality. And I even give them a heads up, like, you know what, on the phone, I'm going to be asking you a bunch of questions again that you've already answered. So just be ready, because I need to find out what's really at play here. So the first session for me is always just the time to not only understand more about them and their own worldview, but also see, is the rapport there? Do they feel comfortable with me? Do they feel safe with me? Because especially if it's in person, right? Because that in-person connection in the office is very different than meeting with somebody through telehealth, let alone a phone call even. So I'll find out like what else is going on. Like, are they fidgeting? Do they have any cuts? Do they have any bruises? So am I assessing for any violence or any abuse? Do they have any psychosis? Is there any other undiagnosed symptom that's going on that they haven't talked about? So, or do they have, possibly autism? So there's a lot of things at play where I'm really assessing, is this the right fit? Because again, I want to make sure that they get the best help that they can get.
So yeah, I'm always trying to make sure that it's the right fit, they can get the best help, and that I'll be able to help them. Because if I know that they need somebody who can help them in a certain way that I cannot, then it's my duty to send them their way instead of me, for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Matthew, I'll have clients come into the office and they're like, how long is this going to take? And it's really hard to give somebody a timeline. And as we both know that progress isn't linear always, and so how do you prepare your clients for the inevitability that progress may look like one step forward and sometimes two steps back?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm very upfront with them that saying, hey, therapy takes time, right? And I'll always collaborate with them, and I ask them, like, what are their goals? Like, the magic wand question, like, hey, if I have the magic wand that can solve all your problems, what is it? And they'll tell me, like, whether they want to have a healthier relationship with their spouse, or they want to feel happy or hopeful again, because oftentimes people come to therapy because they don't have hope anymore. Then we'll create a plan collaboratively with each other, and we'll say, let's check in maybe 6 months from now. But if they say can't do that long for therapy, then it's like, okay. And it's like, it sounds like you only have availability for 12 weeks. Then we're going to follow CBT. We're going to follow some evidence-based technique that helps you do something within 12 weeks. That way there's a very strict presented roadmap. But I also tell people that and this is what I also bring up in the first session too, therapy gets hard. And all the feelings you have, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Because all the things, especially with men, all the feelings, all the emotions that they have been pushing down into their gut, not wanting to talk about, not wanting to process, now that we're talking about it in therapy, it's like, the pressure release valves are going off. Everything's starting to bubble up to the surface. So they're going to feel like, I'm not feeling better. It's like, yes, you're not feeling better because you're processing it, but it's going to take time. So that usually gets the buy-in, and they'll understand, like, this isn't going to be solved in 1, 2, 3, or 4 sessions. This is going to take a couple months worth of work. And oftentimes, most of the people I work with stick with me for a number of years. I've had a couple clients, especially when I was a trainee, where they were only approved for, say, 8 to 12 sessions. And I've had a few where we hit the ground running, and we were able to help them really take back control of their most salient symptoms in those 8 to 12 sessions. But it was very rare and few between, but the clients took it extremely seriously. So when there was a homework assignment, like, I need you to journal. I need you to really make a log of all the stressors you're facing. I need you to talk about the emotions. They took it very seriously, and things were significantly better for them within 3 to 4 months of work.
Wow, that is awesome. And that kind of leads me to my next question, Matthew, and that is, how do you know when a client is ready to kind of graduate or terminate therapy?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, the defining success, right? So, you can tell when somebody's doing much better and they're ready for graduation when a lot of the presenting issues they had start to disappear. They don't have somatic symptoms anymore. They don't blow up at work anymore. They have a much more regulated nervous system. And, you see, especially if there's like OCD involved, people are starting to really learn to tolerate uncertainty and resist those compulsions successfully. So when people report they're able to look at their triggers or their fears in the face without wishing for the world to explode or blow up in front of them, that way they can avoid and escape the moment. That's when hey, you're building that resiliency. You've built those tools to handle everything. Maybe you're ready to go bi-weekly. Maybe you're ready to come in monthly, especially with couples. It's like, oh, you are making the time to talk with each other once an hour without me present, and you're not having a massive fight? You don't need me next week then. In fact, I had a couple I just closed out with in January, and I even told them, like, you don't need me anymore. And I said, I'll gladly take your money. I'll gladly keep you, here for my full rate. But it's unethical for me to not tell them, you're doing great. What you're doing here, keep doing it and see how it goes. And if they have trouble or if people need to come back to focus on the work that previously popped up again, I always tell them the door is always open. Whether I see you 2 months from now, 2 years, or maybe even, a decade, we can always pick up where we left off.
Yeah, that's great. So clients can always come back to you if they need additional support.
Yes.
Got it. That's awesome. Yeah, Matthew, what's been the kind of overall feedback from the clients that work with you?
They like my directness. They like that when it's appropriate, I don't pull punches, and they like that I challenge them. The clients also like that I do hold them accountable, especially when it comes to career pivots or really trying to find out what their next step in life might be. I don't know if it's just the state of the economy, but there's been a lot of career changers. And, I myself was a career changer. I was initially pursuing an academic career before I ended up jumping into mental health. And it's been a great journey for me ever since, and very rewarding. And for many others, whether they were in the creative arts industry that are now looking to jump into the business world, or people that started businesses and did okay, but now they want to do something that gives them more work-life balance. So they want to become a social worker. They found the journey to be very rewarding, but you need to find that confidence again when you are switching careers. So people like that. I will help build people back up, but I'll also challenge those negative thoughts they have when they start to have a spiral. It's like, hold on. Who's telling you that you can't, go back to school because you're too old? Where are you getting that from? Is it from your mom? Is it from your partner? Is it from your friends? No. Then who are you hearing it from? From me. Why? I use why. We're not supposed to use why, but I use why. I'm just direct. I don't let them get off easy, but they grow from it and they like it. That's why they keep coming.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, Matthew, for somebody that's listening to this episode and they really like your style, they like what you're saying, they resonate with the work that you've been describing, but they're reluctant to reach out, maybe because they've never been to a therapist before, they've never worked with a therapist before. What would you want them to hear?
I would want them to know that what you're going to get in therapy is a very genuine and a very authentic approach to meeting you exactly where you're at. And you're going to find somebody that really wants to understand your own worldview. And that, it's a privilege for your clinician to work with you. It is. And they genuinely want to help you. And vulnerability needs to be normalized in our society. So it can take time. It could be difficult, but just trust in the process. And at the same time, if you're in therapy and you don't feel like the person you have is a right fit, we don't take it personally. There will always be somebody out there who might be a better fit for you. Go out and try it. And also verbalize to your therapist, what do you need? because that's how they can best help you. And honestly, it makes our job a lot easier when you tell us, I need this. And if it's appropriate and it's the right direction, absolutely, let's go with it. But do expect some pushback too, and do expect to be held accountable as well.
Yeah, and I resonate with that a lot because it really is a privilege, to be granted access to a client's, inner world, and the problems and a lot of that vulnerability. It's a sacred privilege, I consider it, and yeah, truly, it's an amazing privilege to have as a clinician. Matthew, I'd like to shift gears for a little bit and ask you about your practice. Is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, let's talk about it.
So what's on the horizon for you, sir? Are you thinking about maybe putting together a coaching program? Do you have any online courses, anything out there that you're getting ready to put out into the marketplace?
I think for me, the big goal is I want to get licensed. I'm only a couple hundred hours away. I just need 200 hours and I'm there. So that's the big goal. After that, I do want to, eventually I do want to put together some type of retreat, but I know that's also a whole liability issue as well. I do have a friend actually who he's lived in Palm Springs, and through his work, he works at this like horse sanctuary, I believe, or they have a ranch where they do take people on horses traveling around, the mountains around Palm Springs. And it's been very healing for people, especially managing sobriety, because then they start to look at the horse. They kind of ask, what do you like about the horse? What do you think about the horse? And they're really projecting what they value in people. And it's very therapeutic, it's very healing, and it helps them. So I do think, looking at some nature-informed therapy journeys is what I would really like to do. So I do want to try to get some retreat like that, maybe take a group of people hiking, take them camping, or for a weekend someplace, whether it's Joshua Tree, Palm Springs, or maybe someplace in the forest. That way people can kind of disconnect and really focus on each other. I also think that I would really like to get interested into like couples retreats as well, because I do think that, we are seeing a lot of the pandemic couples that got together are really starting to have trouble right now, because now it's been that 5-7 years. So people are now and there's just been such a relentless, societal trauma, and it's been one thing after another, right? It's been the pandemic, then it's been some military actions, and then it's been more economic precarity, and now we're seeing gas. Like, there's just one thing after another. So I do think, creating some type of space for people to just really come back, unsettle, and reset their nervous systems would be very beneficial and therapeutic for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome, Matthew. Are you are you in private practice right now, Matthew? Do you have your own shop, or are you looking to get into private practice if you're not in it?
I'm in a private practice right now. I do work at the Feeling Space, which is, we are a group practice founded by Danielle Golan, and we have supervisors, Lisa Jellison and Jen Bearden. We have a really great team with some really great coworkers. But the way we operate is, we do our marketing, we do build our own caseloads. Of course, our founder will help us with it, but we work for like an umbrella, but we're very much a small business, but we've done some pretty great stuff. And we do work with, families, couples, individuals, you name it. And we all have our own niche. So we all attract our own wide array of clients as well. But we're out there, we're marketing. So we've learned a lot about the business, so for sure.
Dude, that's awesome. Matthew, yeah, this has been great, man. I really appreciate your time coming on the show. If people want to reach out and partner with you, how can they reach out?
There's so many ways. If you Google me, Matthew Herrera, Associate Marriage and Family Therapist, you'll find my website, which is www.therapywithmattherrera.com. You can also find me on Instagram at instagram.com/MattHerreraMFT, or that's my handle is Matt Herrera MFT. I just invested in Google SEO, so I should pop up much easier for people now. But I would say my website and my Instagram are definitely the best way to get a hold of me for sure. I'm also on Psychology Today, like every other clinician, but yeah, we're all there.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to plug all that in the show notes. Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, sir, to join us on the podcast. Really appreciate it. And maybe we could do it again in the future. How does that sound?
Absolutely. Hey, I would love to, man. It's been a pleasure, and I really appreciate you having me on this platform. And hey, happy to talk with you further anytime.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Signing out to the next one. Bye.